Fault. I apologize for the delay, and in my hurry to get the meeting started on time, I didn't ensure that all the agendas were up on the screen, so please accept my apologies. Item 4, discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the executive director to make certain project expenditures on the Airway Interchange Aesthetic Project. Mr. Tejas.
Good morning. Ray Mateus, Executive Director of the Camino Real CRRMA. So this first item before you relates obviously to the Airway Aesthetic Improvements Project. This, as you'll recall at the last board meeting, we had an individual from the construction contractor group come in and update the board on the project. So you know roughly where we are. We're coming close to completion, but one of the items that we mentioned last month was that there have been some changes that we needed to address at the board level in terms of change orders, including not only adding items but also removing items as well. So what you see before you today then is a board resolution looking to do two things. Specifically, authorize the changes as identified within the resolution, which you'll see as attachment 1 to the resolution, and I'll go into those with a little more detail here in a moment. But then secondly, you'll also notice that I'm asking for authorization to make additional project expenditures for the project in a total amount not to exceed $25,000. The idea there, and we've done this with prior projects, but the idea there really is as we near completion for the project, I'm looking for a little flexibility so that if in the event there's an unforeseen condition that needs to be remedied at the time, I could authorize that at my level rather than having to wait for a board meeting so that we can continue progress on the project. So that's the intent really behind the second component of that board resolution, but we can talk about that in a little more detail. And I'd mentioned the $25,000 noted in here actually corresponds with the authorized amount within the procurement policies that the executive director has authority to pursue. This is just above and beyond, or I should say that it's the exact same amount that's also authorized in the procurement policy, but it's more explicit in this specific board resolution. So arguably I'd have the authority to do it already, but this just makes it clear from the board perspective that you all are authorizing that specific amount. So anyhow, back to the original intent of this resolution. We have also with us Mr. Matt Hardison, who's a project manager from the construction contractor group, if you have any specific questions about this. And we also have Jaime Gallo from the general engineering consultant team, who's our project manager on our end as well. So we have technical expertise if you want to delve into any of these details. I thought though that I would touch on some of the specifics. So if you'll look on within the backup on attachment 1, you'll note the top 3 items really are actually what are referred to as deductive change orders. So these are actually credits to the project for items that we've removed, including some planting prep work that we removed, some riprap stone, which is some of the aesthetic improvements that we had planned. We've pulled that back, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One I would mention is that there was riprap planned for some areas that were actually in the pedestrian walkways. So for safety reasons, we've pulled that back and left that with concrete for sidewalk. Column wrap substitution, that's one that the artist has actually changed. If you recall, the original plan, or one of the original plans, was the columns under the Airway Bridge would have metal wraps on them that were laser cut. The artist, when we were discussing the constructability issues with it, in the end decided against those and opted instead to paint the columns. So that resulted in a savings to the project. So that's what you see in the first 3 items. Outside of that, these are all additional added items. There are a couple of unforeseen conditions that we're addressing. By way of example, there was a portion of the roadway of I-10 that actually extended further into the slopes that we've removed to add the aesthetic improvements. So we didn't know that was there, so we have to add a bit of cost for the additional demolition of that roadway. There's also additional footing materials that were required for footings that we actually had to make deeper than we had originally anticipated. There's pedestrian crossing poles, which we discussed briefly last month, which will actually add to the pedestrian walkways on the east side of the project that were not originally there. So I think that's important as well. And then small things too, like by way of example, the repair of existing spalls on the retaining walls. Those are really the small chips and cracks that you see along the retaining walls. excuse me, we were adding another $5,000 into the project just to clean those up. So when we walk away from this project, the entire interchange looks brand new. Kind of along those lines, we're adding bird spikes. We've noticed along the development of this project that the pigeons like to roost under that particular bridge, actually under most bridges, but this one in particular. We've tried a couple of approaches. We've tried adding those plastic owls, which we've actually got a great photo of owls sitting there roosting next to the owl. So anyhow, we're adding bird spikes to make sure that the facility remains as clean as possible for as long as possible. So outside of that, unless you have any specific questions, I think we've covered the gist of this.
Mr. Tejas, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
The one large cost item is the additional backfill material for the planters. So it looks like the total is $95,687. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that's relatively minor for a project of this size. I believe we had is it a 10% contingency built in?
Well, so this one was a bit unique. So these are TxDOT funds. What we ended up doing is not specifically identifying the contingency amount. However, normally industry standard is about 4% for change orders. With these changes, and I should have mentioned, and I'm glad you brought up the point, the $95,000 is actually a not to exceed amount. We don't actually anticipate hitting the full $95,000. But if we were to hit the $95,000, the total change orders on this particular $7.1 million project would be about 1.3%. So we're significantly lower than industry standard. Now, industry standard is across all types of projects, so it's a little bit odd. But in either case, 1.3 is a really great place to be.
And just for some of the new board members, this was a kind of a rehab of an existing facility. So you go into an existing facility, you never really quite know what's there, such as when the contractor went in and found, as they started digging down, they found some additional road bed where I-10 had extended out further. So these are fairly normal costs and relatively low compared to a project of this size. Just give me a quick update on the additional backfill material for the planters, the $124,000, and if you just let us know what that is, Mr. Tejas.
So on this particular one, the planters are up on where there originally were slopes. So with the slopes, there were calculations that were made for the backfill material that was required to go back into the area that was originally the slope area, and those calculations were a bit off. So that's accounts for the missing backfill material there. I'd mentioned too, the chair referenced the 10% contingency. That's what we were anticipating for this particular project. We were really anticipating a great number of change orders because of the complexity of it, because as the chair mentioned, this is going into an existing site. It's also an artistic project, which normally aesthetic projects normally have higher change order numbers. So because of all of that, I'm very, very happy to be at 1.3%. And if you'll notice, a number of these are really improvement change orders. The bird spikes, the additional loose aggregate, which I didn't mention. We're actually taking some of the aggregate, some of the larger rocks, and putting them out on the airway median where originally we had mulch. So we actually have some really nice additive features that we're adding here within this change order. So I think it's a really positive addition.
Good. I think we have Matt Hardison here with Jordan Foster, or Foster Jordan, if we wanted to ask any questions about these. Any questions from the board members?
Just one, and that may add up to 50 days to our completion date. Is that?
That's correct.
Additional changes.
That's right. Now, and actually, I'm glad you mentioned that. That was another one of the big points I meant to mention. I failed to, so I apologize. We're adding potentially up to 50 days. That's absolute worst case scenario. We do not anticipate hitting the full 50 days. And in fact, if you notice, the item directly underneath there refers to additional traffic control. What TxDOT has recently agreed to is actually allowing for closures on both sides of airway. By doing that, we are increasing the additional traffic control costs, so we have additional barriers we have to add and that sort of thing. However, what it does is it actually drops the amount of time that will actually be on site. So the additional traffic control costs is directly related to the number of additional days that we're adding. So the additional days that we're adding will, I'm almost certain, will be less than 50 days, so I'm happy to report that. The additional days, though, were added by there was a number of or there was certain work related to the retaining wall form work that the artist tweaked and played with. So we had to add some days there, and there were some other areas where we had to add some days. But in the end, like I say, the concession or the agreement by TxDOT to allow for the double closure is going to be a really big help for us.
Mr. Tejas, when are we looking at substantial completion for this project?
You know, I had that and I'd forgotten. I'd ask maybe Matt or Mr. Gallo to help me out on that date.
Morning, Chairman and members of the board. My name is Jaime Gallo. I'm with ECM International, member of your GEC team. Substantial completion, we're looking at early November. We really hope to get done by end of October and in time for the TxDOT Commissioners meeting in town. So the TxDOT really helped out with allowing those lane closures. And I'd like to commend Jordan Foster. They've been great partners out there in negotiating these change orders.
Super. Any questions for Mr. Gallo? Thank you for your help on this project, Mr. Gallo. With that, so we're looking at passing a board resolution authorizing the executive director to make certain project expenditures not to exceed $25,000 above these current change orders. Is that correct, Mr. Tejas?
That's correct.
With the understanding that any additional funds that are expended will be brought back to the board for review with the board.
Absolutely.
Is there a motion? Is there a second? All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Item 4 is approved. Discussion and action, item 5. Discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the executive director to submit an application for certification from the Sustainable Sites Initiative Program as it relates to the Airway Interchange Aesthetics Project. Mr. Tejas?
This is, I think, an interesting item. So we have also with us today Mr. Michael Berkelback, who's also part of our general engineering consultant team, and he'll be the one spearheading this particular project. So if you have any technical questions, we can ask him to come to the mic. But very generally, and as you'll note in the backup, the Sustainable Sites Initiative is really the landscaping equivalent of the LEED certification process that happens with green buildings. So the Green Building Council manages the green buildings. So the Sustainable Sites Initiative manages this process for landscaping and aesthetic projects. So we came across actually Mr. Berkelback, or actually I correct that, the contractor group, Mr. Matt Hardison, came up with this and came across this as I believe the UTEP project is doing this. So we started looking at it, and I think it'll be a good fit for this particular project. So in the end, the gist of it is that we will be evaluated on the project in terms of the materials used and the impact of the walkability, the sustainability, and certainly the renewable energy source of the wind turbines is going to be helpful as well. In the end, we're hoping to get a certification from the Sustainable Sites Initiative for this particular project, which I think would be a nice award for this particular, or a nice recognition for this particular project. So, subject to your questions, I certainly would recommend approval. But again, we have Mr. Berkelback here if you have any technical questions.
Mr. Tejas, are there any other sites in El Paso that have the Sustainable Sites Initiative?
You know, I don't know the answer to that.
Mr. Berkelback, do you?
The answer is no. UTEP would be the first one that's pursuing it.
The answer was no, and UTEP would be the first site. Is there any cost to the RMA for pursuing this?
There's an application cost of, I believe, $135.
And as I understand, kind of like the LEED program, you have certain levels, like silver, platinum. Is the Sustainable Sites Initiative the same process?
That's correct.
And we don't know what those would be until after the site is evaluated. Is that correct?
We're going to have to ask Mr. Berkelback to answer those.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the board. As far as the...
Could you just introduce yourself real fast?
My name is Michael Berkelback. I'm a project engineer with the GEC team.
Thank you, Mr. Berkelback.
All right. Now, since this is a different type of project from most of the sustainable sites, what I found is that they are particularly geared towards large parks or botanical gardens. And this is a streetscape project, so we're not going to be able to pursue any of the gold or silver type. We're just aiming for certification and maybe one notch above it. It has to do with the particularities of it. We don't have so much green space. We don't provide wellness. But in looking at a cursory review of their requirements, we do meet certification. So that was one of the hopes.
Excellent. Any questions for Mr. Berkelback? Good work, Mr. Hardison. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. Mr. Berkelback, thank you for your assistance. I tell you, I think this would be, just one, it's a magnificent redo of that interchange and kind of the aesthetics project for that area. And then two, to get a Sustainable Sites Initiative certification would be really ideal. Is there a motion to approve item 5? Is there a second? All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Item 5 is approved. Presentation and update on the following projects. A, Loop 375 Northeast Mainline Extension, and B, Loop 375 Joe Battle at FM 659 Zaragoza Road Direct Connectors. Mr. Tejas?
So very briefly, I'll ask Mr. Berkelback to approach the podium again. Mr. Berkelback will be presenting for us on these two items, as he was the lead on keeping an eye on TxDOT. Let me very briefly for the public and certainly for the board provide a brief background on these two projects. You'll recall that Trans Mountain Northeast and Zaragoza Direct Connector projects were both partially funded by the Camino Real RMA through the state infrastructure bank loans that were backed by the City of El Paso's transportation reinvestment zones. So that's a mouthful. The gist of it is to say that the RMA was involved financially on both of the projects, and we, by way of example, Zaragoza, we provided a little over $16 million for the development of that project. For Trans Mountain Northeast, we provided a little over $2 million for that one, and that one was specific to the aesthetic improvements, which you see now in the Northeast, but also they actually took that design and applied it to the Trans Mountain Northwest project, which has turned out really, really nice. So what we were doing on this particular project, in addition, because we were providing the funding, we actually did some loose oversight as well. So Mr. Berkelback would attend meetings and he would provide monthly updates and that sort of thing. So we'd been working with TxDOT and the contractors on this for quite some time. These projects are near, if not actually complete by now. So I thought it was appropriate that we bring Mr. Berkelback to the board and let you know how they went. So with that, I'll ask IT to bring up the PowerPoint, and I'll ask Mr. Berkelback to run with this item.
All right. Well, good morning, Chairman and members of the board. My name is Michael Berkelback, and I am a project engineer as part of the GEC team. I was tasked to provide oversight to the direct connectors on Zaragoza and Montwood and the Trans Mountain Northeast aesthetics improvements for the Main Lanes expansion project under the supervision of Greg Blake of Atkins and Melchor Hedera of ECM International. So first, the next button. Thank you. Excuse me. So for each project, I'll be going over an overview. I'll discuss the RMA's role, talk about construction, project costs, project status, and at the end of both presentations, I'll be available for questions. All right, so the first project was Loop 375 Main Lanes expansion. So that includes the underpass at US 54 and then 3 overpasses. The first one at Kenworthy, second one at Rushing, and the third one was at Alcan, which was new construction. Alcan prior to this project was not much of an intersection, so they completely built it up to allow for a third major route or thoroughfare through this area. It also included frontage road improvements, so it was widening and resurfacing of the frontage roads. So here you can see the MSC walls with the diamondback rattlesnake. Excuse me. Is there a way to get rid of these yellow dots? I sort of created them.
What's unique about these aesthetics, too, is I believe the city utilized Ms. Vicki Scurry, the artist on the Airway interchange, and
That's
utilized
correct.
some of her skills to create some continuity between some of these other projects, and I believe that is a direct result of Ms. Scurry's involvement, correct?
Right. Wonderful cooperation between MCAD, the Museums and Cultural Affairs Department, and Vicki Scurry in selecting her. And at first, I think it was very confusing to people working on the project. They really didn't understand what the panels were to look like. They could see that there were these diamond shapes in them, but amazingly enough, if you stand back at a distance, it really does look like the shimmering of rattlesnake scales. So each panel was positioned, and so in construction, here you see a picture of a form liner, And then the rebar that's going to go in these were precast in the Far East side by the contractors, within the contractors company. And then they would pour them. They would label each one. There were 8 unique patterns. And so each one of them had to be pieced together like a puzzle on site. So the contractor would scratch in the name, and then when they arrived on site, they would know where to put them. So you lift them out of the form box and then start to erect them, sort of like an erect-a-set, but with a very complicated pattern. And this is very innovative for the area. We've never had a project quite like this. Standard MSE walls might have a stone veneer or might just be a simple face pattern. But this is the first time that we saw in El Paso where you really had to think about what you were putting. So one of my roles was making sure that the right pieces were in the right place.
Nice thing about these too, with no veneer, with no paint, there's really no maintenance issues on these.
Well, there is paint, and we do have an anti-graffiti coating on them. So here's a completed section of wall that's ready to receive the coping on top of the MSE wall. And then now you can see this is in the underpass. So it has a nice cream color that's very mild, but we did put in a anti-graffiti coating as part of it. But they're sand colored. They're very gentle in their appearance. Here we can go over the project costs, and these are the project costs as they applied to the change order number 6, which the RMA was funding. Each item, so for example, a permanent concrete barrier, as you can see in the 5th line, was already going to be constructed. But the additional cost to add Vicky Scurry's detailing into those barriers is what the change order number 6 was covering. So the overpasses were always going to have mechanically stabilized earth walls. The difference is that now they have a unique pattern, something that we can accept as regionally defining. And so the largest cost would be that $1.3 million for the retaining walls. And then here's another. This project was completed and open to traffic in April 2014. We're still waiting for the finalization, the TxDOT to close out the project before we can receive our final financial statements. But if you were to drive Loop 375, you would be able to continuously travel through this area. And if you were on the frontage roads, you'd be able to see the detailing in the MSE walls. And if you take the underpass, you can see these facade walls. These facade walls were poured in place, but it's a wonderful example. Now I'm going to move on to Joe Battle Zaragoza Direct Connectors project. The construction of the 2 direct connectors are north-southbound, so if you were traveling in a northwest direction, you'd be able to then travel in a northeast direction. You'd be bypassing Montwood, and you'd be bypassing Zaragoza intersections as far as the lights are concerned, so it's alleviated a lot of the traffic in those areas. Then on the reverse side, if you're heading south on Zaragoza, north of Joe Battle, you'd be able to directly transition onto Loop 375 southbound and then be approaching the New Americas interchange, which would allow for you either to continue towards the Zaragoza Bridge or to take the direct connector bridge and join I-10 without stopping at a light. In total, the RMA committed $16,086,236.90 to this project. All of the money had to be spent within the TRZ. The TRZ allowed for the incremental tax rates to be going towards paying back of this loan. So one of the main things was making sure that any additional construction that went outside of that zone by TxDOT was not using RMA funds. So in total on this project, there were 8 change orders. 5 of them were due to design changes. For example, we had the wrong type of soil nails in the design packages, which ultimately resulted in a $40,000 increase in the project cost. Excuse me. 3 of the major change orders were due to detours and phasing changes that were caused by delays that arose because of right-of-way acquisition issues. There was a holdout in selling right-of-way to TxDOT, and because of that, the Zaragoza portion of the project was completely rephased. And instead of being able to build the main lanes and the bridge part first, they had to build one side of frontage road and then a bridge, and then stop construction and then move to the other side once they had acquired the right-of-way and build again. So it led to some significant challenges for the contractor, but they were amazingly able to accommodate. So also there were several issues with utility relocations, none of which were the responsibility of the RMA to fund. We had no obligations towards utility relocation or right-of-way acquisition. Ultimately, so the initial contract bid days were 618 days. Because of the right-of-way acquisition issues, they added 67 days to the contract, but the contractor was also paid to accelerate the project, and they were able to finish in 608 days. So the initial estimate from TxDOT was for $28 million. The award amount was for 25.5 approximately, and the final cost was 27 million. So even through all of the changes, they were still able to be under the initial estimate. And in total, they were able to utilize all the RMA expense, all the RMA contributions of $16 million. So on this project, the roads were open to traffic on November 22nd before the Thanksgiving holiday, and that was the main reason for the acceleration, was trying to ensure that we didn't have construction going on during the holiday seasons. The final closeout of the project was accepted by TxDOT on April 15th, and we received the record drawings, the final as-built drawings, on August 12th of 2014. So if you all have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Any questions from the board? Both of those pretty signature projects. I don't know how often you would use that Zaragoza interchange prior to this project, but that Zaragoza interchange was a mess. So this really has done a tremendous amount, as well as Trans Mountain Northeast as well. So, Mr. Brookback, thank you for your update today.
Well, Board and Chairman, thank you all very much.
Item 7, presentation, discussion, and action on the court processes for failure to pay toll fees for the Cesar Chavez Express toll lanes. Mr. Tejas?
Board, as you all know, we opened the Cesar Chavez Express toll lanes in January. So we're right about that time where the toll bills have gone out, the violation notices have gone out, and we're almost about to head into the next step, which would be the court process. So at this point, I'll ask Mr. Ron Fagan from our general engineering consultant team to approach the podium and ask IT to bring up the slideshow for number 7. We've got today, Mr. Fagan is actually going to outline the court process for those individuals that choose not to pay for use of the Cesar Chavez Express toll lanes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members, good morning. Ron Fagan, Fagan Consulting, sub to your GEC. Today we're going to talk quickly about the court process, and we have reached this critical stage in your operations, give you an idea how that works, where we are with getting those folks through the process, our efforts with the municipal court, and what you should expect to see in the coming weeks. So what is an acceptable amount of non-payment? Well, it just depends. Agency, facility, it all depends. But the key is that the agency is following through with all the tools that it has to enforce and try to ensure that the customers are actually paying the tolls. No perfect systems, no perfect customers. It's not zero defect, but you are trying to persuade the vast majority of the people that paying the toll is better than trying the alternative. So risks to the agency obviously include potential loss of revenue if you don't have an effective program. The rating agency, should you ever decide to go out for public funding, will be very interested in how well you do this process and that, in fact, you follow through with this process. Your paying customers expect those that do not pay to be dealt with, and your community at large wants to know that a facility that is for the betterment of the community, everybody that is using it is actually paying their fair share. So what gives you the authority as a regional mobility authority to actually pursue toll violators? And it is in Texas Transportation Code 370.177. A couple of key points here. Agencies have the authority to issue or fine up to $100 per transaction. If you've seen any of the news lately with other agencies, the fees or fines get ridiculous, and that is not something that you want to be a part of. What your situation or your process is to charge $15 for the entire toll bill. The bill may have one transaction or it may have 50 transactions on it, but it is only $15 for the toll bill itself.
And those toll bills go out every 15 days. Is that correct, Mr. Fagan?
Aggregated up 15 days worth of transactions, and then they go out. And then the customer has 30 days with a grace period to pay the toll bill. And we'll walk through this process with a diagram flow so that you better understand. Court is always an option. It's the last stop, though. We really don't want to go that far. We much prefer to have customers pay upfront and move along with the process. If, however, they end up in court, it is solely up to the court. They have the authority to charge up to $250 for that court appearance. So the idea is to be firm but fair. The entire system involved in actually being able to process violations involves many aspects. It is the cameras in the lane. It is being able to get the correct information from the DMV, utilizing the mail system to send information to the customers, and giving them an established time to pay. We've shown this slide once before. All this is saying is there is a great deal going on in a lane at about 70 miles an hour or 45 miles an hour. Part of the issue is to be able to take the pictures of the front and rear license plate and capture all of the information pertaining to that vehicle in that transaction to include date, time, so that it goes into evidence if it is needed if a person chooses not to pay. We did a great deal of testing on your system before we ever opened it to the public. There was factory acceptance testing back in Austin. There was testing when they installed the first lane to be sure it worked correctly. Follow transactions from the lane to the back office to be sure that everything worked as it should before opening this up to the public. So that you could be confident the system worked, and ultimately, if we have to take it to court, the justice of the peace or the municipal court is satisfied that the system works as it should. So you all utilize, as do all the RMAs in Texas, Municipal Services Bureau, which is a collections firm that we several years ago transferred to a payment processor. So they do everything from receiving the images, processing those images, sending out a toll bill. If those bills aren't paid, they follow up with notices. They can put the person in collections or begin collections activities, and they can put the court packet together. So they are your one-stop shop for back office payment processing. And we talked about this diagram and how the process works. There are really only two key points I want to make about this. Each diamond or decision point that you see is an opportunity for the customer to do the right thing and pay the bill sent to them. The first thing they receive is a toll bill. They have 30 days to pay that. If they do not, $15 is added to that entire bill, not each transaction. They have 30 days to pay that. If they choose not to do that, a second violation notice is sent and an additional $15 for the entire bill is sent. So now we're up to $30 in fees for that bill. If they don't pay that, they go into a collections process, which adds another $30 to the bill. So we're up to a total of $60 for this bill. There was some concern, what if a person only has one transaction? Your policy is with MSB, no person who only has one transaction is forwarded to court. That just doesn't make sense. We wouldn't do that. The second thing is that this, when briefed to judges and municipal court prosecutors, they too understand that the customer, before they got to them, had 5 separate opportunities to do the right thing. On the $15 and the $30, the breakdown of those fees, 5 of those dollars are yours, 10 belong to the vendor. Those can be waived, and typically they start with the customer wants to cooperate, but they don't want to pay quite that much. They will waive your $5 of that fee to encourage the customer to go ahead and settle. The idea is not to collect fees. The idea is to get customers to pay the tolls and have the correct behavior when they go out on the facility. Okay? I think that was all I wanted to add on that.
So, Mr. Fagan, a
Yes,
couple of key points. So,
yes.
we aggregate 15 days worth of charges on the toll facility, and there could be 1, there could be 20, whatever it is.
Yes.
Bill goes to the customer. They've got 30 days to pay that bill.
Right.
It details all of it. There's just a $1 processing fee for the pay by mail is the only additional fee on that bill.
Right.
And the tolls, obviously, for pay by mail. There's a toll violation notice that goes out at that mark, and in another 30 days, there's a second notice of toll violation go out. So we've got the toll bill is the first notice. We've got the first notice of violation at about the 60-day mark. Then you've got the second notice, so that's the third. In collections, we'll call the customer, and if that doesn't work, then we've got a last chance letter that goes to the customer and says, hey, we really want to get this resolved. We've notified you 5 different times about these toll bills that need to be paid, and if there's no response, then we would file a complaint with the municipal judges. Is that correct?
That is correct. Ample opportunity for the customer to do the correct thing. Another point I'll go back to is you are adding the $15 to the entire bill. You're the only agency, or the RMAs are the only ones that do that. Everyone else adds a dollar amount to every single transaction. And you can imagine that becomes a big number after a short period of time. It doesn't speak to customer friendliness, it speaks to other things. So you are trying to be more than fair with people and getting them to go through this process so that, in fact, by the time they get to court, and even as the chairman stated, there's one last letter that says you will go to court. We will file against you if you don't pay. So none of this is a surprise by the time we get to this point.
One note to mention about the court, to clarify. The court can charge up to $250 in court costs, but that's entirely up to the court.
Yes.
Those are all court fees. Those are all City of El Paso fees. None of those fees come to the RMA, to the facility. That's all up to $250. They charge whatever they feel is reasonable for this particular charge.
Right.
There's also, we looked at this. It's absolutely not our intention for somebody with 1 or 2 or 3 toll violations to take them to court. The court process is really for someone that's somebody that's uses the toll facility on a regular basis and has had ample notices. And while I hope we don't have to go to court, it may be important to let folks know that we are not going to waive the payment of the toll charges for those folks that don't want to pay them, because all that does is penalize the folks that do pay the charges timely and everything else for someone else not to. And I think that's an important part of our collection process, that if we have to do that, and I hope we don't, that's a tool in the toolbox to get the bills paid.
Correct.
Another question, do we have any leverage at the time of renewal of their license? It seems to me we had some conversation about that at some point, where when they go to renew their license or registration, that do we have any leverage at that point?
I'm not certain that we do. That's and I've forgotten the name for that, but I'll look into that and let the board know.
It's the habitual violator.
Well, there's that process, but I think what Ms. Melendez is referring to is the scofflaw provisions that the City of El Paso uses when there are violations against. Let me get some details. Yeah, I don't want to mislead you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
The notices when they go out are bilingual?
Yes.
Okay.
Everything is in English and Spanish.
That's a good question. Also, I'm assuming the collections are also bilingual as well, that there would be some phone calls once the collection process started, I assume? Is that correct?
Yes, and there are always a set amount of customer service representatives that speak Spanish, and individuals selecting or choosing to want to speak to someone that speaks Spanish are directed to those people.
In your experience, the court process is important in terms of the overall collection, and if you don't have the court process, then you probably have a smaller, is it your experience that without the court process you don't have as good a collection prior to court?
That is absolutely correct. Some people do not believe until they get to the very end that you're actually going to do anything. And so we do have agencies that either are very skittish about doing it at all or haven't done it. And what it says to customers more and more is, well, nothing's going to happen. They go to the community party or they go to somebody's house and they have a discussion and they understand nothing happens when you do it. And more people are encouraged not to pay. Nobody wants to be the chump, if you will. I pay, but I know my neighbor does not. If you don't have something at the end of the road that says you are absolutely going to court, then the odds of being able to maximize your revenue are pretty slim.
The collection process and the toll structure consistent with other tolling agencies in the state?
Other tolling agencies outside of the regional mobility authorities, which all use this process, the 4 that are operating use this process. The others add a fine per transaction. So if you had 10 transactions on the bill, in this case it's $15 for the entire bill. Harris County charges $11 per transaction, so now you're up to $110 for those same. Others add different fees. They increase as you go along to include hundreds of dollars by the time you get to court. And in one case, one agency requires you to pay additional funds if you want to speak to the hearing officer. This, by far, in the state of Texas, is the fairest process out there.
One of the things that we want to encourage people to do too, these are strictly the pay-by-mail. With a toll tag, if you create a toll tag, much easier, there's no pay-by-mail, it's all the costs, it's cheaper, it's easier, and that's how we want to collect our tolls. We would prefer that everyone uses a toll tag. If you're an occasional user and you want to pay by mail, that's fine, but we need to continue, the authority does, to continue to try to get the word out about utilizing the toll tags. And the benefit of that is you don't have an invoice that comes in, you get busy, you forget about it, and then all of a sudden you get a notice of violation and it just added $15 to that particular bill. We want to avoid that by continuing to get the word out about toll tags. And as we talked last time with the GEC, looking at some of the more frequent users of the facility who don't have toll tags and putting something out in writing to them about the benefits of a toll tag and continuing to push people in that area. So.
In that line, each toll bill that goes out has information about and encourages toll tag and tells them how to get that.
And of the collection fees, did I understand that $5 of the 15 at each point is waivable at our discretion?
It's at their discretion on your behalf.
MSB's discretion.
Right.
And
Okay.
it's only $5 on the first two. It's actually $10 on the collection. So you've got 15, and 30. The portion that's waivable from the RMA is 5, and 10.
Is there a way to leverage that to incent the violators to convert to toll tags?
We are in discussions with MSB to encourage that. The difficulty MSB has is they themselves don't run a back office that has or issues toll tags, but they are encouraged to inform each customer toll tag is an option, particularly if a customer starts complaining, well, I use this. Well, you have another option. Here it is. Here's the number. Here's the website, in a nice way.
Thank you.
Sure.
We also have a fairly high threshold. That's not a threshold we want to publicize because we don't want customers to know if I stay below this number, I won't go to court, and if I go above this number. But there's only a single-digit number of potential folks that we would look at taking to court, and we're not there yet. We've been in operation now 8 months, so this is absolutely the last thing we want to do. This is not how we want to collect fees. We want just people to use the facility, to enjoy the convenience of the facility, and just pay the facility fees. But if we need to, this process is in place to make sure we have that collection process.
It's an accurate statement. So the next slide, not sure how I get it back. Oh, there we go. What I've been amazed over the past 17 years is customers tend to get to the court process and think it's your word against theirs. They have no idea how much information you actually are bringing with you when you file the complaint in court. So these are just some of the things that are there. It also continues with if the municipal court requires more information, there's far more information available down to the second they use the facility, what was going on. Any phone conversations the customers called in and tried to explain, all of that is available if the court decides that they want that sort of information. So where we are going from here, we have had several meetings with the municipal court here to talk about the process and how they want information. We've given them samples of what's been used before. They are actually tweaking those documents to fit their processes. When you all are ready, MSB will start a dialer campaign, which is calling these numbers a couple of times a day just to let people know we really need to talk to you about your outstanding balance. They are about the 15-day mark. We'll send a last chance letter that says not maybe or possibly, it says we will file against you in court if you do not contact us. One thing too to point out that no matter how much they've accumulated, MSB also has a payment plan. So you aren't expected to have to pay a lump sum right away. 6 months, 8 months, whatever it takes, they're more than willing to work with people so that it is not an onerous fine that has to be paid right away. Once we get going with this last pre-court process, in about 6 weeks or so, the first complaints likely would be filed with the court, and then it is up to the court on their docket and time when they would actually begin to bring these people or summons these folks. That is my presentation on court as part of violation enforcement. Any questions?
I believe, just from your experience, for some of the habitual violators, some of the folks that just have gone through the process and haven't paid the bill, how many times do you need to take those folks to court before they start paying the toll charges? 2. What happens is, no matter how many transactions they have that they have not paid, typically, and we've learned this over lessons learned years ago, we only file one. I say we, you, I'm director of operations too long. You only file one transaction. You bring them to court for that one. And we've been successful with getting the judge or the prosecutor to say to the person, this is one. You actually owe this many. If you don't take care of it and enter some sort of payment program, they will bring you back in here again. And very few people have tried that. And when they're in there the second time and it's filed, 100% of them enter a payment program not to have to go through the process a third time. Does that answer your question, sir? It does. It's also important to note that the threshold that we kind of have set doesn't include any of the fine numbers. It's just strictly the toll dollars in terms of the toll use. So it just, and we've got a decent threshold. So we're not going to go after the person that has used a facility 2 times, 3 times. That's not the person we're going to take to court. We're going to take someone to court that has regularly used the facility and has refused to pay. So, any questions for Mr. Fagan? Mr. Fagan, thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
Mr. Tejas, I don't believe there's any action required on item 7. Is that correct?
No, sir. Just an update.
Item 8, update, discussion, and action on the Executive Director's Report. A, the introduction of the CRRMA's new senior budget analyst. B, the Texas Attorney General's opinion regarding the County Energy Transportation Reinvestment Zones. C, the Federal Highway Administration's Livability Summit, August 21st, 2014. And finally, D, the International Bridge, Tunnel, and Turnpike Association, the IBTTA meeting in Austin, Texas, September 14th through the 17th, 2014. Mr. Tejas?
So each of these items is very brief, so we'll go through these very quickly. These are really just intended to be updates for you and just kind of let you know what's going on. Item 8A, I wanted to mention to you all, as you'll recall at the last board meeting prior to the end of the last fiscal year, we entered into a management agreement with the City of El Paso whereby, among other things, we are actually now paying for 1/2 of a full-time employee from the City of El Paso, and in this case it's a senior budget analyst, and she's going to be very instrumental in us getting our books together and really kind of moving forward from the financial side, but she'll be assisting on other areas as well. So I thought I'd take a moment to introduce her. She's behind me. Her name is Esperanza Garcia, SB Garcia, so I just wanted to introduce her to the board.
Garcia, thank you for your help, and we're certainly glad for the assistance with the RMA, and you come highly recommended, and we're glad to be working with you.
I'll tell you, I'm very excited myself. She's already, since she started in September, she's fixed an issue where I wasn't going to get paid on Friday, so I am now going to get paid. She's done some other stuff, but not quite as important. So
that kind of somehow that got moved up on the priority list.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. So it's been a great addition already. Item B is an interesting one. So you'll see in the backup, I've included an Attorney General opinion that was recently released by the Texas Attorney General. That, in essence, really, when you read through it, it essentially casts questions on the constitutionality of county created transportation reinvestment zones. So that, of course, impacts us here in El Paso because of the 2013 Comprehensive Mobility Plan, which included various funding sources from the county of the vehicle registration fee, but more importantly, the transportation reinvestment zone that the county recently created. So I just wanted to let you all know that this opinion had been released. It has caused quite a bit of discussion across the state with all the other counties. There are, I think I saw a number of approaching 200 in terms of the number of transportation reinvestment zones and other increment finance districts that counties have created throughout the state. So we are certainly not alone in this issue. You'll note also what I included in the backup was the original request from Webb County to the Attorney General, the Attorney General's response, and then an actual request for additional clarification from Representative Pickett asking the Attorney General how this works because it seems to conflict with prior Attorney General opinions. So there are folks working on this throughout the state. I wanted to mention it to you all because it does have a direct impact on us. In terms of the County of El Paso and the funding source, for the 2013 Comprehensive Mobility Plan. We've been working with them to identify alternative approaches to fund those projects. As you'll recall, the 2013 Comprehensive Mobility Plan included $62 million of debt from the State Infrastructure Bank that the Regional Mobility Authority was going to issue based on a pledge of the county's TRZ. So we're looking at all sorts of different variations to make that project, or make that program whole again. So that's just an update for now. Unfortunately, I don't have a resolution for you, but right now it's just an FYI.
That affects the Horizon and Socorro TRZs as well, correct?
The TRZs, it does not, because the Horizon and Socorro are municipal TRZs, and
So
they're
it's just the county TRZ itself.
That's correct. Now, however, you'll recall that the county TRZ was generating revenue that was going to be combined with the Horizon TRZ and the Socorro TRZs to develop those projects within those zones. So it does impact their projects, although the municipal TRZs are left untouched.
When will you think there be a decision in regards to this particular item?
Unfortunately, I have no idea. It's in the Attorney General's hands, and they have, I believe, 60 days to respond to Representative Pickett's request. But ultimately, we don't know if that response will actually solve it or create additional questions that have to be routed through the courts or the legislative session, which will begin before too long. So unfortunately, we really don't know, and because of that, and because of the projects that were essentially kind of put on hold through the Comprehensive Mobility Plan, the county has decided to move forward with one or more approach. So that's why I say we're working very closely with them to identify how to keep these projects from stalling out.
And it appears there could be some workable solutions if the TRZs for the county would not be a valid vehicle.
That's correct. Yes, sir. So that's just an update on item 8B. 8C and 8D are just recent or upcoming items that I wanted to mention. The Federal Highway Administration came to town in August and they held a livability summit. I've included the agenda for you, and this is just an FYI. I briefed the attendees on the bike share program, and it was well received, a lot of interest in that one. So that's just an informational item. Same with item 8D. The International Bridge, Tunnel, and Turnpike Association, which is obviously an international association. They have annual meetings this year. The president he's the chair of this organization is actually the executive director of the Central Texas Regional Mobility Authority, Mike Heilingenstein. And he has convinced the organization to have their annual meeting in Austin this year. And you'll note that it's September 14th through 17th. They had also asked for the Camino Real to have a presentation, so I'll be speaking at that on Tuesday, and I'll be speaking on a panel speaking to border tolling. There'll be an individual from Europe. There are some folks from the Canadian border and elsewhere dealing with how tolling operations work along borders. So, of course, we'll be talking about the Mexican border for my presentation. So anyhow, that's just an informational item as well. And I'll share a very brief PowerPoint that I'll be presenting at that, but mainly it'll be a panel approach, so we'll just be answering questions from the audience. Anyhow, again, no action is required on any of these items, and subject to your questions, that's really all I have for you today.
Any questions for Mr. Tejas? If not, is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? All those opposed? We are adjourned at 9:57 a.m. on September 10th, 2014.